You should all be getting a little record saying you are not being recorded. Do you agree? All right. So with that said, so in 3, 2, 1. Evening, every folks. This is Langtheris.
Oh. This is Buck.
Hey, this is Hoots. It's been a while.
I know, to the point where we keep making these awkward pauses because we're so out of like practice doing this crazy recording thing on Zoom of all things.
You know what?
Welcome to the Caps Table podcast episode.
I was going to say, welcome to the Caps Table podcast. We're going to throw this on the Caps Table feed, which I think is still up. Maybe I don't. Well, okay. So the WordPress site, the AIE-Guild WordPress site just took a digger, right? And like Stu and Stig are actively in process of figuring that out. I don't know if that applies, if like Theris, if you want to do some research while I fill the dead air. I don't know if that also applied to capstable.net and CSM Watch. We owned that.
No, it did not. They had their own feeds, so they had
excellent.
So they have their own hosting. Be up and running.
They're still okay. I think,
and we still have the Amazon storage, so all the episodes are safe.
Okay. Yep. So.
And heaven forbids, I still have all the scripts and all the copies of recordings that I used to do. It's like clogging up my hard drive still. But hey,
I don't have any of those. I got rid of all of that. Stu has backups, but all of my edits are like long gone. Which is terrible, right? But
no more having to look over at that lip smacking spike you grew to hate during the recordings. But I digress. We're supposed to be talking about tabletop RPGs and D&D and all other stuff. So yeah,
brief, I don't know where my webcam is, a brief discussion about tabletop RPGs. And candidly, like this is meant for I guess an internal audience among like AIE, right? That's kind of where we're all coming from, and we're all friends within like the AIE community, but certainly this will be available on the wider internet. So if you want to see what us yahoos think about the whole state of tabletop RPGs and like the month of the end of December up until like the end of January, and then continuing onward with this whole open gaming license debacle, you have come to the right place.
Yeah, because we at one point, like you alluded to it, the entire like tabletop RPG, primarily due to D&D, was on fire, and what a glorious dumpster fire it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, I digress again. So we'll go ahead for the uninitiated. We'll go ahead and go through introduction. So we'll start off with Hoots. Hoots, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Hoots. I am affiliated with this lovely group of folks called Alia Iacta Est. They're a giant World of Warcraft guild. I am not a currently active World of Warcraft player. I used to run a little EVE Online corporation, Alia Iacta Est Universal. As far as I know, my characters are still in the corporation, but it is dormant. I am currently winning at EVE, although I am still subscribed to the subreddit. As far as tabletop gaming, I've been involved with tabletop gaming for a while. Like, I'm a white nerd, right? Like, I remember I was maybe 6 or 7, and one of my mother's friends was babysitting us. And her 2 older children, who were in their like late teens at that point, had a friend over, and they were playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition. And I remember seeing that and thinking that was one of the coolest things ever. Can I play? And the answer was no, you're 7. You absolutely cannot get out of here. And so ever since then, I was obsessed with the hobby. And I guess I played when I really started playing kind of with my own peer group. I did a lot of playing in high school. That would have been between, if I'm going to date myself, that's 3rd edition and 3.5 for Dungeons and Dragons. So that's right between like the year 2000 and 2004. In 2004, I went off to Ye Olde College, and there was this little system that I know Bach's going to be smiling, that got a new edition in 2004. And it wasn't D&D, but it was a little company called Steve Jackson Games had their 4th edition of GURPS come out. So between the years of like 2004 and 2008, I played a crap ton of GURPS. That was what had taken over my college campus. And GURPS is a crunchy system for those of you not familiar with it. But yeah, then I had a little bit of a hiatus, and I came back to D&D right around maybe in the middle of 4th edition, and I ended up DMing for a group of friends. And I know 4th edition gets a lot of flack. But what I will say is 4th edition, the math kind of made sense and it was easy to DM, right? You say what you will about like the rest of 4th edition. We don't need to get into that argument. But that's where I kind of onboarded. And then when 5th edition came out, I kept playing that and more or less semi-regularly ran groups for my kind of real life friends in the great state of Wisconsin. And I think I've dabbled with a little bit of Savage Worlds, which is another really great system. I am a big fan of Honey Heist, for those of you who are familiar with it, especially at running one-shots. And then, gosh, what else? And then I just own like a gajillion like PDFs and books that I'm never going to run or never going to play in because I have too many books and too little time is basically what it comes down to. But that's kind of my, I guess, tabletop RPG bona fides, if you want to say. Yeah. Bach, why don't we go to you? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm the old guy. I was born before born. I remember Blackmore. So for those that know about Blackmore, yes, I was born before that. No, I started D&D in '83 with a red box when it went out. You had the red box, the blue box, the green box, the black box for Master, and the gold box for Immortals. That was the base system. I was also playing and DMing AD&D because they were running the same editions. I switched to D&D to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2 when it went out. Then there was a kind of hiatus when TSR went dead at the end of the 90s in 97. And nobody knew exactly what to do. So that's when I jumped and I went to Steve Jackson Games and I GM GURPS. I am the proud owner of every single 3rd edition book.
It literally takes up like a
which
room
is 320
house.
something. And I have several of them because when they were making new changes, they were reprinting books. So I have some books that I have several times. Every time they reprinted them. GURPS is the best system in the world. You can play bunnies. And bunnies and burrows, the best book they ever made.
That's the best, like, yeah, settings book for GURPS. Absolutely, 100%.
After 2006, I started dabbling in 3rd edition and 3.5 after that. When 4th edition came in, I stayed with 3.5 and I went to Pathfinder, which is a 3.75 from Paizo. And I stayed in that world because Paizo was publishing a lot of books while Wizard of the Coast, because that was Wizard of the Coast at that time, was mostly concentrated on making Magic the Gathering. Not much. And there was the 4th edition debacle, but which I was not aware of it. It's just that there was no books. You had the basic rules, you have a few scenarios, and that was it. Because there was no third party, there was no campaign, there was no campaign settings, there was nothing. They advanced a little the story about Forgotten Realms, but that's about it. And when 5th edition came in, people started playing 5th edition because it's much more easy to get in and get new players than Pathfinder, which is a very complex and crunchy system. And right now I'm playing and GMing Pathfinder 1, Pathfinder 2, Starfinder, and 5th edition. So I'm in that macrocosm. I stopped GURPS because, yeah, that's way too many books.
Also, you can't find GURPS players anymore. That's the real problem, is no one wants to play GURPS, which is a shame because it's a great system.
I play Illuminati still, the card game from Steve Jackson Games, which is one of the best games.
And everyone plays Munchkin, which that's like, you know, nerd card game overhyped, I think, probably, but yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I've been playing for almost 40 years now, which is yeah. And I've been through all those editions and edition wars. But tabletop role-playing games, even if I play a lot of video games, tabletop is my preference. If I could play only tabletops, I would play tabletops, day in and day out. Next is Lank.
My experience. So kind of being in the bridge between you and Hoot. So I became aware of Dungeons and Dragons because of the cartoon in 1983. So
That was before I was born, by the way.
oh, dude, it was so campy and so cheesy. It was fantastic. It let me show it demonstrated how really cravenly paladins can be. And here I am playing paladins this day because of that. So who figures? So I actually was made aware of Dungeons and Dragons when I was like 8 years old, but I wasn't allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons. Growing up severely Catholic, in a different culture, of course. I was grew up, I'm Mexican American, so there was a general, I would say, uncomfortableness in playing what was considered a white person's game or a white kid's game. So the general kind of disdain of nerds in general and certain like Hispanic cultures. So I was aware of it. I would see the books, but I wasn't allowed to play. And then, of course, there came in the satanic panic that came in during the 80s. So it kind of, again, I was aware of the game and aware of the game systems and the culture, but was not directly involved. I, of course, was being, at that age, a console player. I didn't actually start playing any kind of tabletop RPGs until I actually got into community college. So around the age of 18, 19 years old. And actually not playing Dungeons and Dragons. What I was playing with a group of friends of mine, and we were all, and don't laugh, I was part of the fencing club. So I was used to running around with a bunch of sword wielding yahoos who had to watch, Princess Bride one too many times and could recite the whole thing by verbatim. So our tabletop game of choice and how I got introduced was actually Shadowrun, and also in definition and in conjunction that Werewolf. Which
Okay, all right. I was gonna guess some sort of World of Darkness system, and I was gonna
absolutely.
make fun of you for like being a vampire larper, but werewolf. Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah,
No,
got
and
him.
vampire
got him.
all the way.
We got him.
Yep, I used to play Werewolf, and and we will actually sit there and yes, I know you can make fun of me all you want. We used to sit around and make fun of the folks playing Vampire the Masquerade, because man, that was really weird. I mean, really weird. I mean, we already had a negative like view of like LARPers in general, but then throw in the kind of as I use the term that a friend of mine used back then, where it's like it's a bunch of losers and wannabes who wanted to be the high school jock and the prom queen, and of course for being socially awkward couldn't do it, but they could do it in vampire form. And we would witness people playing Vampire the Masquerade and just shake our heads and kind of say, okay. So that completed I would have played for 2-3 years, and then I got back into video gaming. And again, this is where we go back to my connection with Blizzard. It was Diablo, the original Diablo, that actually brought me away from tabletop back into the encompassing arms of video gaming. And it was because of that game that I started building my own systems to play that game. And again, left tabletop gaming. And since all that time, just I spent not an a pretty long time actually being the guild master for the AIE, the Warcraft Guild, for a long time, setting up all the strictures and systems that was there that helped out during the inception. Stepped away, got into Eve, of course, and now kind of bored, playing back to console gamings. I haven't been to the Warcraft in a while, and it's like, I'll check out RPGs, because I used to play Shadowrun and I used to play this, and I like I'll finally give D&D a chance, a shot, see what it's all about. And when I get back, the whole world exploded. And I can't tell you whether I enjoy the gaming itself or the drama that's come up from the community and the backlash towards Wizards of the Coast, who's now, of course, the owner of D&D. So you, of course, fast forward to a couple of weeks, and here we are recording this silly little recording, talking about, tabletop RPGs and a lot of things that are kind of happening in the space. So with that said, so why don't we get into it? So for the uninitiated and for the folks who haven't been engaged or involved in D&D, and I leave it to you as you're the experts, a quick little brief history of D&D, quote unquote, and the creation of this OGL thingamajig licensing thing, which is beyond me.
Okay. So again, I am not an expert, but I am a Wisconsinite, so that makes me
By
qualified,
just
right?
by
virtue,
distance and location makes you an
just by
expert.
living, like a 45-minute drive from Lake Geneva, the birthplace allegedly of D&D. We're not going to get into it. We're not going to get into that much history. So there was a company, TSR. I forget what the acronym stands for. But
Tactical Studies Rules.
Yes. Okay. Also known as They Sue Regularly. They were a litigious company. And they owned Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. They created D&D, and Dave got pushed to the side, and Gygax, founded TSR, and then eventually Gygax, because he was a terrible businessman, there is a book that came out last year by Ben Riggs, which is like a history of TSR, kind of an oral history of TSR, and he went and interviewed a bunch of like the business people, like on the marketing and accounting side, rather than like the typical story that people usually go out and seek, like the creatives who are doing like the creative work. But he has like a bunch of sales charts from like the whole TSR days, and they existed throughout the late 70s, 80s, 90s, and there was a CEO for a long while there, Lorraine Williams, who managed to stave off the inevitable for quite some time, but eventually TSR basically was no longer able to pay its creditors, and through a series of machinations, TSR was sold to a shell company. No, Dungeons and Dragons was sold to a shell company, which was then purchased by Wizards of the Coast, which was an up-and-coming company out of Seattle that made this card game called Magic the Gathering, which is maybe you've heard of, right? So that's how D&D got into the arms of Wizards of the Coast and its current owners. At some point, the giant toy company Hasbro then bought Wizards of the Coast. I think that might have been a few years after Wizards bought D&D. I think my history might be wrong there. An actual expert can correct me. The important part is, so TSR, they sue regularly. Like TSR was like just famous for sending out just like completely meritless like cease and desists to everyone who would publish anything even remotely related to Dungeons and Dragons. They were very protective of their IP. So the new overlords, Wizards of the Coast, and specifically there was one guy who's been making his rounds on Twitter recently with the recent fiasco. His name was Ryan Dancy, and then there were a couple of other people involved in this effort. They kind of thought, well, maybe the business model going forward, and maybe as an olive branch to our fans, right, we're going to create this open gaming license that will allow you as kind of a fan creator and a creator to use content that we put into this open gaming license without basically fear of the evil boogeyman coming and suing you because you do that. That is the OGL in a nutshell, and that came out in, I want to say, the year 2000. And again, like the context there is that it was definitely an olive branch and a way for the new boss to sort of issue like a détente between itself, other companies that did RPG publishing, and like the wider community. And it largely was successful. I think there's third edition is primarily what was kind of operated under this open gaming license. So how that worked is There was the open gaming license itself, which is I think like a 900-word document about that if you put things into the open gaming license, these are the terms that you need to adhere to. And then in addition to that, Wizards released probably the 3.0 and then some subsequent revisions, the 3.5 systems reference document as an open gaming license content. So you could take that thicker system reference document, which was basically all of the core rules and mechanics, along with like names and races, and spell names and some like additional flavor text, minus a lot of the heavy branding. You would be able to use that system reference document and copy it verbatim and put it into your game. When 4th edition came out, Bach alluded to a little bit of a scandal. Wizards decided not to release an SRD for 4th edition. They created a different document, the game's systems license, the GSL, and the 4th edition SRD was released under that license, which was way more restrictive. And other companies other than Wizards, such as a company called Paizo, decided not to continue publishing content for the new edition. They were just going to stick with the old SRD for 3.5 with the old open gaming license. One of the provisions, I am not a lawyer, I am not an expert. Nothing here is legal advice. This is what I have overheard on YouTube and Twitter, right? One of the provisions in the open gaming license is people were under the impression that Wizards of the Coast could not take it away. It was a document that predated Creative Commons and kind of more traditionally open licenses like that, but it was thought that if Wizards were to issue a new version of the OGL, that the old version would be fine and that you could continue to release stuff under that and the system would remain open in perpetuity. So that's place a pin in that because that concept is important. So for the entirety of 4th edition, basically most publishers did not publish 4th edition stuff because it was a much more restrictive license. You got new management, or at least maybe a new outlook on things at around the time of 5th edition, when Wizards returned and put a 5th edition SRD back into that old open gaming license. So for 5th edition, you had a pretty robust ecosystem of partners, of creators, of, we'll call them third-party publishers, creating and putting out works under this open gaming license. And then you had, honestly, the explosion of D&D, maybe starting in 2016, with, honestly, like live streaming, with things like Critical Role, right? And then the pandemic happened, and like that only in a way, thanks to the internet and virtual tabletops, just accelerated this trend, right? Where D&D today is, even still today, post OGL debacle, until we see some numbers, is still probably the most popular it's been ever, right? And so that's that is the long-winded historical context.
So a small remark about the 4th
Yeah.
edition. One of the big problems that in that new agreement that they put is that if you wanted to publish anything that was 4th edition compatible, you had to stop publishing anything on any other edition before, which meant that for all the ecosystem that was around, all the other companies, they would basically destroy their full catalog just to be compatible, which is a big no-no because you're not shooting yourself in the foot to be able to work with you again. And that restriction disappeared with 5th edition. And that's why there's so many providers, outside companies, that provide content for 5th edition. New classes, new roles, new campaign sets, new adventures. Everything is compatible, everything is open, everybody thrives on it. But from the Hasbro Wizard of the Coast standpoint, they sell the books, they sell the rules, then after that, they don't get money for it, which is, For corporations, it's hard to do the work, provide the tools, provide the rules, provide the thing, and after that, don't get dividends and money out of it.
So there is, and Bach and I maybe have a slight disagreement about like the ultimate motivation of Hasbro. Although where we do agree is Hasbro is a soulless corporation that only cares about its shareholders, right? So that ultimately, yes, we agree about that. But actually, yeah. So for the past month, up until at least a couple of weeks ago, Wizards, there were rumblings on the Twitter and on the YouTubes that Wizards of the Coast was going to publish a new open gaming license. And that open gaming license, and that was the rumor, right? And people were thinking, well, it's going to be a new open gaming license. And the rumor is that it was going to be more restrictive, closer to that fourth edition GSL license. And people were like, well, that's kind of a bummer. They should maintain open D&D because that's been great for the community and great for the ecosystem. And candidly, like in the case of Critical Role, really maybe, if not partly, like mostly responsible for the explosion in D&D's popularity. Right. So that rumor persisted like throughout December. And then at around the end of December, beginning of January, a copy of that new license leaked to the press, to Gizmodo, to a journalist, Linda Kodega. They wrote about, they basically leaked the article and or leaked the draft and wrote an article about the provisions of the draft. And it was much worse than everyone thought what the license would be, because the draft attempted to deauthorize the old version of the license that had existed for 20 years now. No one thought Wizards was legally, or most people did not think Wizards was legally capable of doing that. And I have heard on the YouTubes and the Twitters and the Mastodons, intelligent lawyers argue it both ways, that yes, like Wizards maybe could deauthorize the old GL, or maybe they couldn't. The fact of the matter is, that is probably something that would have had to have been borne out in court, right? And a lot of like, so I'm again, this is a long-winded oral history right now, but a lot of the legalities around using open content aren't really tested in court. There are some cases related to like board games, and there are some lawyers that have Legal did a video about the whole OGL debacle before it was resolved, and he kind of went into he's a popular legal analyst, lawyery type person on the YouTubes, right? And like his assertion was that you don't actually need this open gaming license to use the content in this system reference document, because none of that can be copyrightable anyway. And that may be the case, right? That might be technically correct, but that doesn't stop Hasbro from suing you, even if that suit is without merit, right? And that will cause you, probably someone who does not have Hasbro lawyer money, a lot of pain and agony, right, to do something that maybe you should be able to do. So these licenses are useful from like a security perspective. And revoking the old OGL basically meant that anyone who had published for the past 20 years under that OGL was suddenly getting the rug pulled out under them. And naturally, people like reacted, I think, appropriately.
Now, if I can actually add
Yes.
something on this. So you mentioned like things like Critical Role and kind of like what kind of started creating attention to D&D. But it's my view is that Critical, yes, as important it is because it is one of the most popular watch streams, and now there's an animated show off it. There's another animated show that's coming in the likes. They have all kinds of merchandise that's coming along. I would have to argue that one of the reasons why Dungeons and Dragons gotten so large and why it was so widely played to due to the pandemic. And people will groan when I say this. It was a major plot point storyline in the show Stranger Things that came out a year after Critical Role. And because of that, I mean, come on, they had an entire bad guys and characters that are named after characters and monsters within the D&D universe. So although Critical Role, yes, is important, I think the exposure that became what kind of allowed it to blow out beyond just the usual knee-jerk cultural silos is the fact that there it is streaming on your TV, watching a bunch of precocious kids playing D&D, running around with a wizard hat, and everyone's like, oh, I totally remember this D&D thing growing up, or hadn't had any exposure to it, and kind of like just it was kind of like the right time at the right place during a horrible
Yes.
time that allowed people to kind of engage in such a way to play with it with their friends.
I think the right place and the right time. I think what happened was lightning in a bottle, right? Like I think Critical Role was maybe like was responsible, and Stranger Things was certainly huge in a phenomena and was responsible. But Wizards had kind of like Wizards like, and so to the credit to the Wizards marketing team, like putting that in Stranger Things, like and having that as a thing at the time that it happened was brilliant, right? But they had certainly tried doing like co-marketing with TV shows before. Big Bang Theory actually had like a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons like co-marketing in I think like the late 4th edition days, right? So like it and D&D didn't take off then, even though that was like a really popular sitcom during its day. So it really was kind of this perfect storm and confluence of events that I think you can maybe credit Wizards marketing a little bit, and you can credit the rise of streaming and like live streaming D&D games, and the rise of tabletop, and then virtual tabletops rather, and then the rise of the onset of the pandemic, right? It is this perfect storm of factors and lightning in a bottle that I don't think you would be easily able to replicate. And I think the openness of that ecosystem was part of that ingredient, right? I think if you had something a little bit more walled gardeny and didn't have like the Critical Roles of internet streaming, I think maybe the like that that lightning in a bottle doesn't get captured, right? So yeah.
And also just for our audience, we've mentioned already VTTs, virtual tabletops. What is a virtual tabletop? You know, how is it that you're able to play what traditionally has been an in-person, bunch of nerds around a table rolling funky dice, playing make-believe? You know, how did that phenomenon come along, and how does that exactly work?
Sure. Virtual tabletops have been around for a while. I think Roll20 came out maybe a decade ago in like 2012 or something. And that's yep. That's sort of the biggest I would call it third party virtual tabletop. And it's nothing more than a website or a piece of software that you have shared audio and video with basically the people you're playing D&D with, and then everyone is looking at a shared, what is essentially a virtual battle map, right? That you can basically place your characters on as like, you would represent them with miniatures when you're playing D&D at like a table. And it gives basically the people who are organizing or being DM the ability to control and manipulate that virtual tabletop and share what's on that virtual tabletop with everyone that's a part of that session. That's really all a virtual tabletop is. It's a fancy piece of software that lets you do the things that you would kind of do online, that you would kind of do at the table online.
And again, another point of clarification. So how exactly does the tabletop thing work? I mean, what's a DM? How does it work?
Oh gosh. How long do we want to be here? What is a role-playing game, right? So yeah,
that's a very loaded question.
And it's been loaded
since the 80s. Because some people would say it's kind of a free fall script, an unscripted play. Some people could say that, which is the game master controls anybody which is not played by the players, and the players control one character. They are placed in a situation and they react and act. After that, you can have rules for you to resolve your actions and create a flow of a game, but ultimately you have one person, which is the game master, that puts the setup, describes the initial, and answers to all the actions and questions of the players as they play their own characters. It's like if you had a scene 1, act 1, which is scripted. So your players learn their characters and know what they do. And from there, you go free wheel for the rest of the play.
Except when you don't, right? So
Except when you don't.
So for all of that, right? For any and all of it, and that's the beauty of role-playing games and tabletop role-playing games is every group is a little bit different, and every group that gets together has their own preferences and their ways of playing. Some groups just sit around a couch and do what's called theater of mind style, either Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop role-playing games, where they have a loose set of rules and they don't have a battle map. They just kind of come to a consensus if there needs to be like, where's the goblin in relation to everyone else? They come to a consensus and they play without miniatures and a mat whatsoever. And it's literally just people sitting around like, you know, a living room, rolling dice occasionally and like drinking beer, right? Or smoking a lot of weed, whatever you do, right? like whatever you do, right? Weed is legal some places now, not where I live, but otherwise, some groups really love getting around a table and having elaborate, like almost set pieces that are like Dwarven Forge, if you want to look up that brand, is essentially like the prototypical, I'm going to build like this giant, I'm going to call it a dollhouse of D&D miniature things where my character is represented by this tiny miniature and he's on this terrain set, and it has a lot of analogs and shares like ancestry and history with wargaming, like Warhammer 40K and Warhammer Fantasy, and just sort of the more tactical wargaming miniature play. You can play D&D like that too, and there are rules in D&D and other tabletop RPGs that let you play one way or another, and some flavors of tabletop RPG are better at that than others. But every group and every situation and every circumstance is different, and very rarely does anyone actually play by the rules of whatever tabletop system they've invested in or are part of. You typically are playing by the rules that you and like that the group has basically come to a consensus around.
Yeah, as a resource, I recently saw the documentary Secrets of Blackamoor that talks about like proto D&D, the kind of the folks involved in it. It's history actually with strategic wargaming, which also led over to like Warhammer 40K and BattleTech and such. An interesting history lesson when it comes to kind of the where this kind of like type of gaming and kind of group dynamics came out. I walk away with one particular quote from that documentary. I think his name, I probably get his name, Anderson, stated where he had
David Anderson.
David Anderson.
Yep.
Sitting around with his friends, basically looking at it, describing the scenario, and basically looking at the players and saying, "What do you want to do?" Completely allowing them to kind of create. How do you want to act and react? So it is part theater, it is part imaginary role play. It's theater of mind, as you mentioned. It's strategic. It's group dynamics. You get a bunch of individuals together who may or may not know each other, and watching those dynamics work, and also the dynamics of the dungeon master.
You say watching those dynamics work or not work, depending, right? Absolutely.
And as a student of sociology, I marvel at how these dynamics work, and oftentimes learning how to metagame or kind of take advantage of particular personality quirks and issues to kind of get what you want. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's not just one thing, and it's also fluid and ever changing. We talked about the theatrics. I happen to be at I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons this past Wednesday night, and I had never seen a player actually bust out a lyre, and actually start playing along as we're playing, as he's doing, I'm going to, inspire my players by playing a song, and starts playing the Song of Storms. And it's just like, that's really cool. We actually had another player who was playing a half-orc bard, who his whole shtick is that, he has an electric lute, and oftentimes would subvert popular songs in that kind of like bardic medieval style song, to the point where at one point he made the joke, "Well, I need to touch myself," and everyone just stops and starts singing "I Touch Myself," as he's now playing along on his guitar and having 50 individuals within the gaming hall all singing along. Just to give you the environment that you're kind of working in and kind of what you're kind of experiencing.
So just for context, Lank, is your Wednesday group, is that at your local friendly gaming store?
That is at my
Okay.
friendly local gaming store, Odyssey Games, which is off of Colorado Boulevard.
And one of the big problem with the OGL and what Hasbro was trying to do, which is retaking control of its IP and its money, was if you kill the books, you force D&D Beyond, you force to go to that virtual tabletop that they own, that they bought last year, which is really dominant in the D&D world. You kill those small structures that will not be able to make money. And right now, if you're buying a book for D&D 5th edition, the last books that went out, they are sold on D&D Beyond 1 month before the stores get the physical copies.
Well,
which
also
means people play on it online. They have the digital copy. They will receive, eventually, if they're lucky, the physical copy one day, but way before it's out in the store. So why would you go to the store? And you can see in many stores right now, the shelves of D&D have been replaced by other providers.
I am lucky enough to have 2 friendly local gaming stores, and it's actually amazing to see the kind of the demographic change and shift, the culture between the 2 stores. This other store, which caters to a much younger player, a much younger crowd, and I mentioned this to you offline, Hoots, was the fact that D&D used to be really prominent middle of the store for everyone to see. They would have a dedicated D&D night, introductory night. Since this whole debacle happened, they've now pushed D&D to the back of the store next to the Star Wars Armada table, which no one goes play Star Wars Armada. It's just beautiful like models and such, but no one plays it. And they've replaced D&D to get to know popular RPGs that are available, and they've all defaulted to Pathfinder.
Yeah, I think a couple points that are really important to touch on. D&D Beyond is now Wizards of the Coast's tool for basically managing characters, managing digital books, or the equivalent of, not PDFs. That's the D&D Beyond doesn't do PDFs. They do their own integrated website thing that integrates with the character builder, and it's a really neat and wonderful technology. And so the interesting thing, so D&D Beyond has been around for a while, and what I wonder, for people who don't watch this video and for people who aren't as plugged in, initially I was under the impression that D&D Beyond was a Wizards thing, right? That like out the gate that it was a Wizards thing. And I like eventually learned, hey, whoa, no, this is like some third party that has licensed the D&D brand.
So D&D Beyond initially was Curse Gaming.
Yes.
Curse Gaming that we know from all the add-ons and the wikis for WoW.
Yep. And they went through kind of an interesting, I'll call it like just with that portion of the internet and its business dealings, because they went to Curse to fandom, and they bounced through like a couple of different parent companies until eventually like Wizards finally was like, yeah, I guess we'll buy them for a significant sum of money. And whether or not it probably was a good investment for Wizards.
It is a very good investment.
Unless they were capable of like, because I mean, in 4th edition, there was D&D Insider, which was a web presence that Wizards attempted to build in-house for managing characters for, again, 4th edition D&D. And there was a tragedy around that literally involved like a really tragic murder-suicide with one of the developers, that I think one of the senior developers on that effort. And after that happened, maybe because like, well, I'm not sure if it was directly related to that or if that was just like a thing that happened around the same time. That effort basically got deprioritized, and Wizards never really was able to execute well on an online strategy for 4th edition. So when 5th edition came around, they had this third-party entity that was executing really well. For years, and they eventually decided, yeah, let's buy them and bring them in and let's make them our own thing. And I think unless they were able to execute as well or well, honestly better, I think buying them was probably, from a business perspective, the right move. But it definitely means that if you're using D&D Beyond, that is a closed ecosystem and garden, right? That means you are buying your books that are, unless you're also buying the physical book, you are buying a license for those books. Like, your characters are going to be D&D characters. You won't be able to create like a character for Pathfinder on D&D Beyond, right? So you are buying into the Apple walled garden of Wizards of the Coast if you participate in D&D Beyond. It is not an open ecosystem, even, and we'll probably wrap up talking about how the whole kerfuffle with the OGL ended. D&D Beyond is going to be something to keep an eye on. And like, what happens if Wizards decides that for the next edition, they've already done it. They've pulled content from D&D Beyond that they think is obsolete now. And if they don't handle that and they just take away content that people have paid for, that's kind of spooky, right? They haven't done that yet, but I think like the Volo Monster Guide was one of the ones that was replaced with it was a book that was replaced and kind of updated with this Monsters of the Multiverse book. So I think all the old stuff under the old Volo's guide is now like labeled as like legacy, right? So if Wizards decided like 5 years from now that they wanted to clean up all that legacy stuff and all the stuff that you bought is now missing, that would be really unfortunate, but it would be within Wizards' rights, I guess, because you don't like, physical books are great because Wizards cannot take that away from you. Like, if you want an opinion there, PDFs are great because you have that file and Wizards can't reach into your computer and take away a PDF. Walled gardens are, I don't know, I'm not an Apple fan, so yeah.
A couple of topics on that touches on kind of like other kind of zeitgeisty. I use the term zeitgeisty. We talk about that legacy and these digital assets going away. Right now there's a huge discussion being led by Carmack, the guy behind Doom, when it comes down to
formerly of Meta and Oculus.
Exactly.
Carmack? Okay.
And basically talking about certain games basically shutting down and being lost forever, because there's no physical, manifestation, product and such. And how do you kind of save those legacy games, which still do have value, people are still playing? So that's on a side tangent. When it comes to, like, again, a newcomer to D&D, and yes, and we'll talk about the OGL issue and one of the actions that was community had when it came to boycotting that. But one of the things that I hated, even back in my Shadowrun days, is the fact of sitting there on a sheet, creating your character, rolling dice, and looking through tables and numbers. I hated that. That was the one aspect of the game I despise. I know some nerds and geeks love that kind of stuff. I don't. See, you're pointing to yourself because you're one of those.
I'm one of those nerds. Traveler character creation is one of the best. Like, if so people like Google like Traveler character creation, it's excellent. The older editions you could like die during character creation. It's great.
Yeah.
Oh, there's several games where you could die at character creation.
And here I am, like, in the period, because I use D&D Beyond, and to be all open, I have over 24 characters I've created in a period of 3 weeks. several of them that I'm working on, some are kind of prototypes. The ability to easily multi-class is a big boon, because now I'm not having to figure out 2 characters. It does all the math for me. All the stuff that, like, the annoying things like your perception numbers or your constitution numbers or what's your roll modifier, it does it all automatically, so I don't have to look up tables and charts to figure that out, which is the one thing that was the biggest barrier of entry for me. And I show up to my games, I have my cell phone or my tablet. It's like, where's your character sheet? It's all there, man. I can give you a link. You can download the whole thing. It's all there for you to access for the DM. And on top of that, those DMs who are using VTTs can actually put links to their campaigns so that you can follow around, and keeps you honest, because if you decide to use and buy digital dice, it's like there's no fudging. It's you see it, they see it. It keeps you all honest.
And it solves a lot of problems of complexity that the games were extremely complex in the 80s. They started becoming less complex in the 90s. The rules have become lighter and simpler to explain to people. That's what I really liked in 5th edition, because it's a good entry game that allows you to learn how to play and what is tabletop. And after that, if you want to play over systems because they are better on other aspects, like if you want to do space or if you want to do or investigation, you don't play D&D for those games. You take a specific game. But everybody has their crowd, and having a tool that is going to make the calculations for you eliminates a lot of mistakes. As I said, I'm a DM for Pathfinder 1, 2, and Starfinder. I have tools. I bought tools on Google to create the characters and verify the characters, because I mess up rules from time to time, or things, and all the interact one with the other. And having online tools to do those calculations for me keeps me honest and keeps everybody honest on that. And you don't fudge because you don't make mistake, which is, it's a great thing.
No, it was, it was, not to interrupt you, but it was great when it was in the last session, because I was using that tool. And, again, I still don't know, or still kind of fuzzy on some of the rules, particularly when you hit like a nat 20, when you critical with a modifier, blah, 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 blah. But when I rolled a 26, because the modifier was +6 to 20, the system automatically, you do double damage. So instead of rolling 2d6s or whatever, it rolled 4. So what could have been potentially a maximum of 12 damage became 24. And everyone just kind of went, ooh, and looked at the DM, which, again, another side tangent. When it was covered into a fair amount of verbal diarrhea by myself over at the AIE Discord, talking about my experience with the last DM who came in wanting to kill everyone because he got his rocks off killing people. And basically, it was a giant FU to him, and everyone just like cheered on and kind of like turned the entire dynamic against the DM, who left the session with his head in his hands, basically crying because he wasn't allowed to murder anyone, because of that. And now to return back to the topic of VTTs, I know there's been a lot of discussions. If you follow the very really well-informed and interesting D&D shorts videos on YouTube, they had a recent episode a couple of weeks ago that talks about Chris Cow, the VP, Wizards of the Coast, who comes from places like Sony Online Entertainment and Zynga and Direwolf Digital. He is now, of course, a VP at Wizards of the Coast. And the kind of internal crusade that he is trying to do and leading in creating Wizards of the Coast new VTT, where we go into perhaps might be providing some of the justifications for changing OGL and killing some of the other VTTs out there, because they want to release their own VTT with such cool things as digital dice, spell effects, animation, all of this supposedly being done in Unreal Engine. And basically he's stating, for the record, I believe, stating that the future of D&D is on the virtual tabletop online. There is a de-emphasis on playing it in person, and using this OGL as a very heavy club to kill things like Roll20. He's even on record saying that he wants to kill D&D Beyond. In fact, he was caught by surprise to find out that Wizards of the Coast had actually bought D&D Beyond, because he wanted to go ahead and create a new system to completely supplant that and replace it.
And I think that's a natural reaction. I'm actually going to defend the suit, right? Which is really interesting. I think that's a natural reaction if you're like representing a company, like, and especially as someone who works for a soulless corporation with wonderful people. Actually, I love all the people I work with, but you know, corporations are inherently amoral entities. We'll call them that.
It's
right?
all about maximizing
Yeah.
shareholder
So,
value.
but if you get a bunch of people within the corporation, I think the natural instinct is we could do this better. We could build this stuff internally, right? And then it's ours, right? So I sympathize with that. But and I think I'll also say it is like there is a lot of speculation, and I know Lank, you referenced the D&D shorts videos. He's certainly been in contact with leakers at Wizards of the Coast, with who have correctly and incorrectly interpreted like the overall situation. So I think it's even having insider information when you have a large organization, it still is difficult to know what all of the stakeholders are thinking, just because there are so many different stakeholders in any corporation, and they're often at like cross ends as far as like motivations and what they want to do with for basically either priorities or for their own monetization, or for their own purposes, right? I assume the D&D creative team has a very different perspective of what they think would be good for D&D than, like, I don't know, the biz dev team, like at Hasbro, right? Like absolutely.
And in Hasbro came in the corporate lawyers teams,
Sure.
because we wanted to take control back of their IP. So
Yeah.
the corporate lawyers got involved. And when corporate lawyers, especially IP lawyers, get involved, they pull their hair and everybody goes crazy, because it's a different world and you cannot understand it. You cannot understand it as a creator, and you cannot understand it as even as a marketing guy.
I mean, you mentioned, Hoots, that like, for instance, Critical Role spun off their, which I believe originally started at Geek and Sundry and spun off after Geek and Sundry got bought.
If they weren't, they were certainly adjacent and in that.
No,
crowd.
they started at Geek and Sundry,
Geek and Sundry?
and
Okay.
then it spun off after they were bought by Legendary Studios.
Okay.
And of course, floundered. They founded Darrington Press now.
Yes.
And there has been some murmuring and talking about they even starting up their own system, which we'll get into again into the OGL. But the reason I bring this up is that there was a recent interview, a podcast. It's a former exec at Wizards of the Coast who was asked about the changing the OGL, and I wish I remember his name.
That might have been Ryan Dancy, who I mentioned.
That sounds familiar.
He's been making the rounds around YouTube, interviewing like a bunch of people, and he, I go ahead, Lank.
He flat out said Wizards of the Coast is playing with nuclear fire in changing the OGL, because I believe he was one of the authors of the original OGL, and he basically was cautioned Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and saying, if you do this, be prepared to reap the whirlwind of the rage of the community.
So we should actually, I'll offer probably a not so quick recap of what happened then, when like the leak happened in like early January. Right. And the community kind of blew up and said that this was terrible. There were other provisions that were also terrible. Like there was a royalty and reporting structure in the new license that people were like, well, that sounds real terrible.
The worst was the 30 days notice to change anything in the agreement,
right,
without your consent.
Yeah, and
nobody's going to sign that.
Like no one who has to print books and keep inventory. Like that's insane. That's a way to ruin like your livelihood.
And if I can, the provision about posting hateful and hateful content or questionable content, that they could go ahead and pull that content, because there's been some folks who create openly racist campaigns, thrown in certain tropes. But then again, Wizard of the Coast is no.
We'll put a pin in that.
Yeah, we'll put a pin in that
because we'll talk about it pretty quick. Because like the leak happened, and so the leak happened, the internet went on fire, and I want to know what the conversations like were at Wizards of the Coast were internally when the leak happened, between when the leak happened and then when the response to the leak happened. Because if you do like a crisis management 101, like I think it was a 2-week period,
Yep.
like before Wizards of the Coast, or it was close to a 2-week period before Wizards of the Coast responded. And when they did respond, it was already a response that was far, like, that would have been unacceptable a day later, right? Like
Dismissive and flippant, I believe, is the
it-
tone of the response.
there was this line along the lines that basically indicated that we've listened to your feedback, and you might hear some people say that we lost. That's not true. Like both the like, and I forget the I forget the
I think
exact
that
line, but it
and I'm
was
paraphrasing,
like,
the term is, you've won, but so did
but so
we.
have we, right? Yeah, just an anonymous letter that was published to the D&D Beyond website, which is now apparently the D&D news website. And we'll get to that in a bit.
And that was surprising that
Yeah.
it's D&D Beyond that gave a communication back after 2 weeks.
So I
It's
don't
not
know.
Wizard or
Ha-
Hasbro.
Have the two of you listened to any of the interviews that Kyle Brink has done in the past couple of days? If you haven't, I have, and I'll at the
I-
end of this, I can give a little
I
bit of
haven't,
context.
but I
Okay.
did read the article that came out just the
But
night
to the
prior,
recap. Okay,
where
good.
he's talking about how providing a justification why it took so long, and it's like,
Yep.
it was a bunch of the usual corporate structure took so long, but the problem is it came off or perceived in the fact that Wizards of the Coast was taking a, well, just be quiet and it'll die
It'll all
off,
go away,
and
or
it'll
yeah.
go away, and then it'll be right back to where we were. And you know
yeah.
what? There's an old saying in crisis management: a lack of response allows rumor and innuendo to become fact, whether it's true or not.
Even if you had like literally the apophism, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, even if Wizards had the best of intentions in like forging a response, like it was a massive blunder to wait that long, because it just let the community like go hog wild, and it confirmed.
And it let all the other creators to take the narrative. They created their
the
own
narrative, yeah,
They took
and
the narrative.
start making their own decisions, right? So
They
in
create
that
their own gaming license,
Yeah.
gaming license and IP, and say, oh, we will protect the creators. We will lawyer up and be a group of hundreds and thousands of.
So you literally, in that 2 week span, you have companies like Paizo who makes Pathfinder, and they also had an antagonistic relationship with Wizards around the end of 3.5 and into the beginning of 4th edition D&D, that they created Pathfinder. You have a really beloved company called Kobold Press that's making their own system now. They announced plans. Paizo again announced plans that they were creating their own license that is open, called the Orc. I don't remember. It's a wonderful acronym. I'm glad they got it. And so that's apparently underway. And
it's more deeper that, because the fact that they've actually talked about founding a nonprofit to hold that license,
and then putting that license in so that no one controls it. Right?
Yeah, no one controls it, no one can change it, no one can pull that rug from underneath you.
So a lot of third-party publishers, and I hate calling them third party at this point, because they're really just publishers, and they're publishers of 5th edition content. Why are they like third-class citizens? Because they're not Wizards of the Coast. Some of like the stuff that they publish is like just as good, or if not better, than the stuff that Wizards puts out. So
actually, not to interrupt you, but on a side note, Wizard of the Coast has just, again, through digital pre-sale, is selling a new anthology of campaigns called Keys of the Vault.
Yes.
Because of what's happened with the OGL, I have never been so amused by the amount of vitriol and dismissal from the community when it comes to that new set of modules. We're basically telling the coach, go pound sand. We will never buy another product from you ever again.
So and because that marketing, if this had been like a traditional D&D product launch like that, the marketing arm would have been in full swing in the beginning of January for that book, and they literally just had to turn it on again like last week, after they finally basically concluded like in a sense, the OGL debacle. But so yeah, Wizards waited 2 weeks, so now we're getting to the middle of January, and they put out that terrible statement that was a little condescending. That was on a Friday, Friday the 13th of January. Then the Monday, we got another statement from Wizards of the Coast, this time authored by a person, Kyle Brink, which was really the community's first introduction to this guy, this poor sap, right? Like, whatever you think about, like, I mean, I do not envy having to be the face of the person that responds to this scenario. I hope Hasbro pays him well enough, right? But not filthy rich money is, I guess, the medium that I would strike there. So but this statement is considerably more, it's like an actual apology, right? It contains actual, like, like, we messed up, we apologize, we're going to begin this process of, like, putting out another version of the OGL that you can comment on, and then we'll go through that process. And like, I think that second statement, had that come out like a day after the leak, might have been helpful. But again, it was like 2 weeks too late at this point, and the narrative had already run wild.
Well, there's also the narrative of the fact that it was a draft of the OGL, but but from what I understand, that draft was actually attached to an actual contract.
Yeah,
I-
you don't send a draft with a contract to
Yeah.
sign in 2 weeks. That doesn't exist.
I think, like, there are people using words, right? Like, it may have, like, 1.1 may have technically been a draft, but it was a final draft by all accounts, right? That just needed a couple of dates appended to it, and people were supposed to start agreeing to this either through like a click-through form, or like what have you. Like, this, like, 1.1 was intended on being, I think, a done deal. And maybe it was technically a draft, and yeah, like, but like, you can be technically right, but I think using that word triggered and made a lot of people in the community very angry, because a lot of people in the community were very much under the impression that this was a thing that was supposed to be a done deal, and now you're gaslighting us, right?
Yeah.
And like, given what had happened with the lack of response, you could see that being a reaction. Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, something I meant to say earlier, and when it comes to all of this, is that at the end of the day, you as a player of Dungeons and Dragons or any actual tabletop role-playing game, you don't actually need to buy the product. You don't need to buy the books.
No.
So it's a situation where it's kind of asymmetric in the fact that by their good graces, they provide a method to publish out the rules and the expectations what the game is. But really, in this situation, the power is all in the players, and they got to say, okay, screw this, we're going to go play fire breathing lizards and miscreants. That's the kind of like the brass tacks when it comes to this. And that the fact that Wizards of the Coast and other games like us need us more than the players need them.
Yeah, absolutely. So that statement happened. A couple of days later, another post went up with this new draft, this 1.2, which was better. It was a better license. It was still highly problematic in a lot of ways. The community, like, made itself known that it was highly problematic in a lot of ways, but there was one provision in this 1.2 draft where it said, we're going to take a portion of the 5.1 SRD and release it to Creative Commons. And that caught a lot of people, and they were like, well, that's a step in the right direction. And apparently then, so Wizards also put up a survey for collecting feedback over this new revised draft. And I think you could be cynical about the survey and using that as like a feedback mechanism. Like, why would you put up a public survey when really the people you should be asking are all the people who are publishing your content, the people that have signed like the change.org petition. Like, the feedback's out there. Why do you really need a survey? But they put up a survey, and may very well have been like genuine about like listening to that feedback. And what happened then, so that survey period, I think, was supposed to go maybe for another week, yet, but they ended it early, and basically said, look, like the feedback from this survey, and the feedback is like clear, like we're not deauthorizing the OGL, and we're releasing the entirety of the 5.1 system reference document under Creative Commons. And
Which brings a question, which is what
Yeah.
happens with 6th edition? Because the 5th edition, okay, we'll put it on an SRD, it's completely open, and you're going to be able to do, which the microcosm that exists in 5th edition will keep on going, no problem.
Yep.
But they've been very silent about what they have planned on 6th edition.
Okay, so the Kyle Brink videos about 1D&D, so that's the playtest before the whole debacle. There was a playtest for the new edition of D&D, whether that's called 5.5 or 6th edition or whatever you call it, right? And that playtest was undergoing. The survey mechanisms that existed for the open gaming license draft was the same survey mechanism that they were using to collect feedback about the new edition, about 1D&D. Right. And Kyle Brink did go on a couple of creator YouTube channels, and so far the things that he has said has been that 1D&D specifically will receive basically the 5.1 SRD will be updated, and that'll be released to the Creative Commons. That's talk, and if that happens, great. Right? There is nothing legally that would compel Wizards to do that. Wizards can do whatever it would like. So I think you have to temper a lot of what Kyle Brink has said in the very recent videos with like, okay, that's, you're saying the right things because you're clearly in damage control and trying to, like, you know, rebuild trust for a brand that has been set into a dumpster and lit on fire. Those words are nice, but I think a lot of people, myself included, are probably going to withhold judgment until like concrete actions are taken, right? So with regards to 6th edition, they could create like a new GSL like they did with 4th edition, right? They could also put it into Creative Commons and make it be completely open. We will see, right, what actually happens with the next edition of D&D. But that's kind of the state of things. Is the good news is Creative Commons is an independent license that's controlled by a separate entity from Wizards of the Coast. And once the 5.1 SRD was put into Creative Commons, it is in Creative Commons permanently. Wizards cannot revoke or deauthorize that license. It is now completely safe. So in that sense, like the community won. Like that fight is over, right? Like I think the community is in, and the openness of 5th edition D&D is in a spot better than it's ever been, because of the license being entered into Creative Commons, which is a candidly way stronger license than the open gaming license was. The brand of D&D and sort of the ecosystem of goodwill towards Wizards of the Coast is not in a good spot, right? Like I think the releasing something to the releasing of the 5.1 SRD to the Creative Commons is the bare minimum I think that Wizards could have done to begin a long and agonizing and slow process of actually rebuilding trust. And they'll never rebuild trust, like for some people, right? Some people are going to be done forever, and that's probably fine.
Yeah, and that's my point, which is I hope that they learn their lesson from 4th edition and they don't make the same clusterfuck for the 6th edition, because I want it to be successful. 5th edition was a great edition. If 6th edition makes it better, I'm all good for it.
Yeah.
If you want to make tools like D&D Beyond or whatever new virtual tabletop we're creating, or in Roll20 or Foundry or whatever, yes, make all those tools. I have no problem with it. Don't nickel and dime me, thanks.
Yeah.
Because I don't like to buy appearance and NFTs and all that. NFTs train is past. It's down. Don't even try to talk about it.
Yeah.
That's a dead game.
Yeah.
If they want microtransaction.
I think for me, like this whole, one of the things that we didn't really touch on is on Twitter and Mastodon, there was a D&D Be Gone hashtag and movement, and calls to boycott D&D Beyond, as like a
Not just
mechanism.
D&D Beyond, but also the up and coming new movie that's supposed to be.
Yes, the new movie, absolutely. Which is, that is, yeah, absolutely. And I ended up unsubscribing from D&D Beyond. That wasn't a difficult thing for me to do. That was actually kind of I saw like the movement and I was like, I'm not running a campaign through D&D Beyond right now. Why am I paying for the GM tier of D&D Beyond? I am going to unsubscribe. And there was a hot moment there where like the unsubscribe page had gone down, and wasn't accessible because apparently there was so much traffic to it. So it is rumored that that sent a message to Wizards, and maybe again, when you say it sent a message to Wizards, perhaps it like sent a message to the stakeholders at Wizards who would have been opposed to like putting something into Creative Commons, right? Like that is probably a very complex corporate, like I can just imagine like the meetings having like, my god, I like sitting in a scrum meeting talking about like where to place a button and like having it be a 3-hour affair, right? Like I get how those meetings go. Something as monumentous of like putting our mechanical rule set into Creative Commons, I can only imagine like the reaction of the community and those threats and actions of boycotting certainly swayed the stakeholders who would have been opposed to Creative Commons into that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, for the record, I believe that the number that was bandied around is evidently over that period, which was within a week. Evidently, there was 40,000 people unsubscribing from D&D Beyond, which is nothing to sneeze at, if true.
Yeah. And so
But to come back to that, the movie, it's not produced by Wizard of the Coast. It's not produced by Hasbro. It's an IP.
that is a Paramount
With the
joint,
name.
right?
It's a Paramount, and
Yeah.
Paramount is also making a TV spin-off.
Right.
Boycotting a movie or TV spin-off which is done by Paramount. Why? I went back to Wikipedia and I didn't know that there were 3 movies for D&D. It was a trilogy, the old one. 2000, 2005, 2012.
I recently saw
only one went to the movie theater.
Yeah,
the second went to TV, the third directly to DVD. So
Hey,
it was not a success at all.
That Jeremy Irons.
Oh,
D&D
that was
movie.
terrible. I recently, again, for research, I couldn't make it past like the 45-minute mark. I just
Yeah,
had
no,
to
it's a
turn it
terrible
off.
movie. Like they're all bad. And
Like,
like I hope the new movie is great. Like I'm not that much of a moviegoer. But
the big problem that I see with a movie about D&D, it's putting the name D&D because they're not going to roll dice. So you're gonna play with rules which are kind of, you're playing a fantasy setting. Calling it D&D is a bit weird. You don't have any names. It's not a Tolkien where you have the Hobbit and all those known characters. There's no known character in D&D. You're not going to put even Drizzt Orden or Mordenkainen or
right. Like I guess you have the Beholder, right, as a monster, as like, but really, yeah, that's not anything remotely.
Well, on the business side, most likely Wizard of the Coast optioned this off and licensed it over to Paramount. Paramount sunk an awful lot of money. The production company sunk a lot of money in this IP, and it would benefit Wizards of the Coast because it does seem to be a tentpole flagship advertising for their game. And there's a lot of money to be made or lost if this is a flop. And with the special effects budgets, Chris Pine's attached to it, this is easily $100+ million movie that's probably expected to make, if we look at the Lord of the Rings trilogies, if you look at the Avatar films, if you look at the Maverick films, Top Gun films, there's a lot of money to be made, but also lost. And I would hate to be Hasbro and its subsidiary Wizard of the Coast finding out that their IP has flopped yet again after all the production company has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in making, producing and marketing this film. So that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, totally. I don't really have anything to add to that. I think I am keen to see what happens in the upcoming weeks and months. I'm especially keen to see, and I don't know if the OGL debacle and this shit show will have a big impact on the movie. And I also don't know. So like initially when it broke, I was like, this is really just like uber nerds like me that are paying attention to this, right? Like this is all licensing stuff. Regular players and D&D people, they probably don't know what's going on. They probably thought D&D
I-
Beyond was, but then it hit NPR, right? Like then it broke into the
Then
mainstream
it hit
media.
Forbes, and then
Yeah,
it hit Bloomberg.
right.
And remember, there's another season of Stranger Things being produced. Will you all of a sudden have that tie-in removed as well? So there is a lot of, at least marketing wise, at stake if this
Sure.
flops.
So
And in the short term, Hasbro has the big numbers for their end of year coming in 1 week. It's on February 16. So that's going to give us some information about their financials after the layoffs, because they went through a 15% layoff in October last year, including laying off some part of the top management. So that was not a small layoff of the bottom people at the bottom. No, that was a major shakedown where they reconcentrate on the IPs and the things that they concentrate, and starting to try to reduce the stock. We have a huge amount of stock of physical games. So I can understand the philosophy of going to virtual tabletops, because virtual, there's no stock problem with freaking virtual.
I mean,
that's easy.
If you're chasing that Fortnite model, right? You let people in free to the virtual tabletop and then sell them a magic missile effect for like 99 cents, right? That's
you
and
sell
like
them the class, the archetype, the
sure.
race. You sell
And
them, everything's
and
nickel and
I'm
dime.
not even necessarily opposed to certain types of microtransactions if you do it like the Fortnite style, right? Like I think Fortnite probably struck the right balance of just having all cosmetic like tchotchkes, but then like the actual mechanics, like you don't charge for. Like I'd probably be cool with that, and I bet a lot of people would, but I don't know if I trust Wizards to get it right. Like I think like what you're saying, Bach. Yeah, I bet they actually charge like, well, actually, it's going to be $10 to play a warlock in the virtual tabletop, and that's how we're going to monetize all of our players, because players don't spend enough money. There was a really unfortunate before the OGL, we're going to call it debacle, in December or so, where there was a Hasbro, I think a Hasbro earnings call, and there was some talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and the word our player base or this brand is severely under monetized got used in a sentence during that earnings call, and it kind of blew up as well. They're talking about us people as like under monetized chips, right? And
And we did that for Magic the Gathering. Magic
I,
the Gathering
so
in the last
Magic
year.
the Gathering, which we
Yeah.
have not talked about, has been an active dumpster fire and continues to be an active dumpster
And it's
fire.
been more than a year.
Yeah, and as I say, I was going to bring that up for context, because it's not just D&D alone. We're also talking about Magic the Gathering, which, again, not to get too off topic, but also there's the additional context of that, as well as another report that came out where an investigative business journalist looked into the percentage of revenue that Wizards of the Coast brings into Hasbro, and was actually discovered that Wizards of the Coast is technically even larger than its parent company Hasbro when it comes to revenue.
I don't remember if it was revenue. I think
So it's 22% of the size of a company and 70% of a profit.
it was margins that were significant for
Yeah,
Wizards
the
of
margins are
Coast.
so
Yeah.
huge thanks to D&D Beyond, because they eliminated the middleman. So the full margin went to them. But what I'm very worried is when I see the communication from Bank of America yesterday, which is lecturing Hasbro and Wizard of the Coast on customer support and satisfaction.
And over monetization. When Bank of America, you were saying this, Lank, when Bank of America, when Bank of America is putting out a public statement that, gosh, we really think we're going to downgrade our recommendation for Hasbro because we really think they have a problem with over monetizing their customer base. When Bank of America is saying something like that,
What
that is a maybe, like, in the words of a very wise man, check yourself before you wreck yourself, right?
What-
Like,
what
yeah.
bizarre world are we living in? Gramsci will be rolling and laughing in his grave to finding out that when one of the evilest, most greediest like corporation bank on the planet is basically calling you on your greed and pursuit of profit. It's like, I'm done. There's not much else I can say.
Yeah, I that's actually, I don't know if we want to call it. That's, I think, a good end. I think we're gonna have to do this again because
No, but
this was.
I
Go
give them
ahead.
good luck. I will hope Hasbro is successful, and I hope 6th edition is successful, and the dumpster fire switch turns off, and we'll be playing tabletops. I would really hope that.
I unfortunately and I admit, because I had a lot of, well, I had a lot of history with Hasbro and some of the things that they've done. There's, it's just look at, and people are gonna laugh at me for mentioning it. Look what happened with My Little Pony and the Bronies and the kerfuffle when it came to that, where Hasbro was trying to kill off a fandom that was basically making them money hand over fist because it became an issue of control. Yes, it's like, as there was ever a case study, just research that, and just like the early days of that particular fandom when it took off. And when the creators and such that were creating plushies and toys and web cartoons, someone even went out to actually create a video game based on the IP, and all like, and the overreaction of Hasbro, and basically trying to kill that baby in the crib, and it made them so much money.
In fairness to Hasbro, that's like Nintendo's like modus operandi, right? Is basically regard like your customer base as
As the
something,
enemy.
as the enemy. Yeah, absolutely. Like, adults don't play video games, children do. This is a children's property.
Then you obviously don't know your market.
Maybe, I don't
But
know.
But with that said, we'll go ahead and end it for the brevity, because this has not been brief at all.
This is not brief.
So by all means, if you enjoy the rantings of us here, please, by all means, let us know. Send out email to linktheris@gmail.com. I'll go ahead and let my cohorts here know what they might say or not say, whether you love it or hate it. We just might make this a regular, feature here and there. You never know. Like it says, what a wonderful and odd time to be alive.
Roll 20.
There's a
Great success.
our new saying, our new sign off. But yes,
We
So-
went the whole episode with me not plugging Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
Hey, I managed to plug Bunnies and Burrows, so
You
I'm
did,
good.
Okay, that's fair.
and
And no joke, like, that is a serious
No,
recommendation.
if that's a
On
serious
both.
recommendation,
For
that's a
both.
very good game.
Yes.
Bunnies
For-
and Burrows.
I have not played Thirsty Sword Lesbians. I own a PDF, but it is one of my too many books, not enough time to play.
I saw the book and I saw the video, and I'm intrigued. Someone turning Revolutionary Girl Utena into basically a tabletop role playing game, because I immediately recognized that's Utena. That is totally based on an anime. Who would have thought?
But if you want to try new systems, I really recommend Blades in the Dark.
Oh yeah.
If you want to play ocean style movies, that's ice.
If you want to have a lot of fun with a one shot, I mentioned it earlier, Honey Heist is really excellent. It's a one sheet system, so it's meant for like just a one-off experience. And I think the premise of Honey Heist is you're conducting a heist and you're a goddamn bear. And there are two statistics: your bear statistic and your criminal statistic. And it's basically a dice pool. And maybe I'm gonna have to run Honey Heist for AIE at some point, because it is just
I think you
spectacular.
will do.
Yep.
So before signing off, and again, it's just again, I'm just throwing it out there just because if there's interest in this kind of like silly recordings. One plea that I'm actually throwing out there is like, we need more diverse views when it comes to this kind of topic. I
We're a
know
bunch
that
of white dudes. I mean,
Yeah.
Mike isn't white, but
I'm not a white dude, but I'm still a dude, and
Still a
it's
dude.
a total sausage fest, and I
Yeah.
acknowledge that.
Oh yeah.
So, person of color, female, transgender, what have you, sparkly unicorns, we want to hear from you, and perhaps had some other more diverse points of view when it comes to these kind of games, because and eventually we're going to get to do it. We're going to have to talk about the context of issues of like race and all those other issues that when it comes to what has traditionally up to recently, and I know there's been a lot of blowback, been an avenue for straight white dudes. And we acknowledge it and we realize that. So we want to open it out to folks to provide us a different view of things in your experience when it comes to tabletop playing. So again, reach out to lengtheris@gmail.com, and we hope to see and hear from you soon. With that said, I don't have quite a catchy catchphrase, but all I have to say is I painted my first mini last week, and it's not bad. It's like, wow, all those years spent in junior college and art classes actually has come back, as my wife laughs at me as I need to go pick up a new shade of green because I only have 3 shades of green. I need more. But for myself, I don't know, any parting words, Hoots or Arbok?
No, all good.
yeah, I'm good. I got everything in. I'm on Mastodon now. I deleted all my tweets. I still have the account on Twitter, but you can find me on Mastodon on like at dice.camp. I think it's my real name, Andy Van Hout. I'm gonna dox myself because if you want to follow me, follow me.
I don't do social media. It's never going to work. It's on the internet.
It's on the internet, and I would plug usually my Twitter account, but that is also, I haven't touched that in years, maybe. And I do have a Mastodon account. I just don't remember what it is right now. But once I get my social media game back on track and find a less odious way to get my words out, I will likely share it then. But until then, everyone, happy gaming, and we'll catch you later.
Happy gaming, everyone.
Happy gaming.
Laters.